Great. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? We have a little quorum. So I'm going to just say another welcome. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Rademacher, and I'm a colleague and friend of Brian Elaine's, and he had a conflict tonight, so I'm helping out facilitating this month. I'm extremely excited and delighted that we're joined by Carrie Connolly, who's a writer. I'm going to do a brief bio intro of her in a second, but just first of all to say welcome to everyone. Just to go over sort of how these sessions are formatted, we're going to ask Carrie to just share a little bit about her writing and her topic, and then we'll have lots of times for question and answers and discussion. So please, note down your questions and topics you want to ask Carrie about. So just briefly, again, welcome, Carrie. Thank you so much for joining us for the second Tuesdays discussion group with Writing for Life. And I'm delighted to introduce you. Carrie, for those of you who don't know, is a best-selling author. She's published 3 books and a number of articles and blog posts. She's a certified coach. We just heard she's back in school. Maybe she'll tell us more. And she is the author of Good White Racist, Confronting Your Role in Racial Injustice, as well as the forthcoming book, right? Or is it out
now?
No,
it's out already.
It's out. Okay, so the title there is Wait, Is This Racist? A Guide to Becoming an Anti-Racist Church. So welcome, Carrie. Thank you so much again for your time, and really excited to hear your thoughts about how to write and speak about controversial topics, which and dangerous perhaps topics.
Yeah.
Really excited to be having you join us. So
thank you.
Yeah, if you can just tell us maybe a little bit about your background and just launch right in.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So if it's okay, what I'd actually love to do is I have 4 or 5 points that I want to offer about what it takes to write about controversial topics. And then I want to kind of tell you my story, because I think it'll all make a little more sense if we do it that way. Okay. So if that's cool. So as you can see, I write about controversial topics. I write about things that make a lot of people angry. Surprise, surprise, right? Given the titles. But I didn't always do that. There was a time when I was afraid to have an opinion or to own my opinion. I may have had the opinion, but I kept it to myself. And I'll tell you why and what the situation around that was in a little bit. But that brings me, that is actually my first point, is that when you're writing about controversial topics, you obviously, it might be like, hello, Captain Obvious, but you have to have an opinion. You have to have a real moral, certitude of sorts, right? That you can stand behind, something that you feel passionate about. And you feel so passionate about it that you're willing to risk being vulnerable about what your innermost thoughts are, because vulnerable writing is powerful writing, and it's transformative writing, right? And so many people are really afraid to do that. I can't tell you how many people are really afraid to commit to what they believe, right? And to actively say it and act it out in the world. And one of the things that I think you'll see from my story when I share it is that my decision to write authentically about my opinions about controversial topics changed my life, very, very literally changed my life for the better in every way. And so having an opinion and writing about it openly, authentically is absolutely number one. Knowing what your opinion is, knowing how to articulate it well, really thinking it through. I think a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this too, I have definitely written pieces that were unformed or underformed opinions. And while sometimes that can lead to really good writing, because I'm exploring, right? I'm asking questions and I'm being curious. Ultimately, I know where I'm starting from. I know the starting point, and I know where I think I want to go, right? Now, that's not to say, and that's also going to bring me to my second point. And I want to tell you too that I want to get to the dialogue fast, because we were just talking with Kate and Brian. I was saying how much I really enjoy dialogue. I don't want to just be a talking head. So I'm looking really forward to our conversation together. But it brings me to the second point, which is you have to have an opinion, but you also have to be able to hold paradox and nuance, and to be able to interrogate your own opinion over and over and over again, because I think that is what really makes for the kind of writing that not only gets attention, but keeps people engaged and engaging with your material and transforms them, right? Because anybody can write a shock piece. And I'm often accused of writing shock pieces, right? Because people say, oh, you're just trying to get attention. But no, I'm actually really holding, yes, I do it in a snarky way. My voice tends to be, I have kind of a snarky attitude, Jersey girl kind of attitude. That's my voice. But I also work hard to hold paradox and to dance along the edge of nuance and to draw out the complexity of the human experience, right? Because in this cacophony that we live in these days, right, the world is so very binary. And while I definitely always have an opinion, and pretty much anybody who's read my work knows where I stand on things, which is why I'm always surprised when somebody comes to my Facebook page and wants to argue with me, and then they're shocked when I actually hold my opinion and respond to them in, like consistently, and they're shocked by that. But being able to draw out the humanity of these complex issues rather than just only stereotyping and only using archetypes, and also pointing to the truths that may be embedded somewhere in the roots of those archetypes, right? And drawing those things together and really being able to capture that middle ground, not in the place of your opinion, but in that nebulous place where truth kind of is. If you're searching for that and really doing the work of trying to dig a little deeper below the sound bites that this current culture loves, right? Our current culture loves sound bites. To dig a little deeper than that and to be willing to hold paradox is really, really important. And I think it makes for the most interesting writing. So again, you can get attention by having an opinion, but having the ability to hold paradox is going to keep people engaged, and it's actually going to help transform them. So I think that being able to hold paradox is really, really important. The other thing that I think is really important, especially when we're talking about controversial topics, especially because often those controversial topics deal with particularities that are myriad, right? But you have to be willing to make mistakes and make them publicly. And that's a really, really hard part of having any kind of a public opinion about anything. It's really hard because you have to be willing to not only make mistakes, but own your mistakes and own them well. Because you can make a mistake publicly and not own it well, and you can make a mistake and own it very well. And I think that when you learn the art of making mistakes publicly and owning them and not erasing them, that gives you skin in the game. It gives you street cred because people can look at you and say, okay, yeah, she made that mistake. She owned it. She learned from it. She's going to make a different choice next time. And she's still in the room. She's not leaving because, and that tells me that this wasn't performative work. This wasn't shock work. This was actually a passion of hers, because you don't just walk out of the room when you make a mistake about something that you're passionate about. If it's truly something that you are convicted about, you're going to stay in the room because it's important, right? And I think staying in the room, showing that you've got skin in the game is one of the things that comes with being willing to make mistakes. But it's rough out there. It's really rough out there, which brings me to point number 4, which is that there absolutely will be a cost. And when I consult with churches who predominantly white churches who want to become anti-racist. And I tell them from the get-go that there will be a cost. They will probably lose some congregants. There will be people who get angry at them. There will be discord. And that any kind of change management is going to require discord to move toward the new thing that you want to be, right? And I think it was Donald Miller who said that if you're not making 20% of your audience angry, then you're doing something wrong, right? Like that if you're really actually standing for something, you need to actually be willing to make some people angry and maybe possibly lose some readership. And I will tell you that, it could come as, depending on your topic, mine has offered me death threats on Twitter and trolls, on social media. I've gotten the curse-laden diatribes in my personal email. I've gotten all sorts of comments on my blog posts and, all sorts of things. And it's really ridiculous. But the cost could be even more dear than that. I have had a very close family member of mine tell me to consider him dead because of my work in anti-racism. I have lost friends and family, who refuse to talk to me anymore, who unfriend me on Facebook, who literally, and it was kind of amusing, ran from me when they ran into me in the shop in the food store. Like they literally ran away from me, so there will be a cost for standing for what you believe in, and that has to be okay, right? You have to be okay with that. When I say okay, I'm not saying it's not going to hurt. I'm not saying it's not going to suck, because it's going to hurt and it's going to suck. But it's also worth it. It's worth it to stand up for what you believe is right. And it tells me here's what it tells me. It tells me that when I have made someone that uncomfortable, I've touched a wound that needs healing. And even if I never see it, I sincerely hope that somehow the touch that I gave to their wound will start them on their healing journey, even if I never see the results of that healing journey, right? So there will be absolutely a cost. You will experience discord and stress because of writing about controversial topics in a way that takes a stand. But it will be worth it. And the reason that I say that is because when I started actually writing from an authentic place, I was shocked at how many people actually came up to me who I never would have expected would have even been reading a faith-based blog, came up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much. You got me through the election." Or, "Thank you so much. I think my kid is trans and you helped me understand that God is cool with that." Or, "Thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing, because I really needed to hear a white person say that today," or whatever, right? So I was shocked at how many people my words were actually impacting in ways that I never imagined, right? So those are my 5 tips that I want you to remember, that it will be worth it. So what I said was, you have to have an opinion. You have to be willing to hold paradox. There will be a cost, and that's really important. But and to be able to make mistakes, I forgot about that. There will be a cost, and it will be worth it, right? I promise you it will be worth it. And the "it will be worth it" is where my story comes in. I want to tell you how I kind of got here. So essentially, the way my life was absolutely transformed because of the decision that I made to begin writing authentically started when I was on staff at what I now understand was a pretty fundamentalist church, a big, I call it the skinny jean pastor, shiny tooth church, smoke machines, rock bands, like the whole 9 yards, right? I was on staff. It was a big mega church outside of New York City. And I was on staff there for a number of years. And when I was on staff there early on, I was also writing a side gig, a column for NJ.com. It was a parenting column. My kids were small at the time. And up until my kids were born, I never really felt the need, and this is a completely privileged place. Let me be clear about that. But I had the privilege of never having to really wrestle significantly with the question of my theology around LGBTQ, the LGBTQ community. But when the ferocity of motherhood enters your life and the fierce love that a mother feels for her children, I was like, there's nothing that is going to come between me and my kids, no matter who they become, and who they are. And so I realized that I had to be pretty vocal about that. And so for my parenting column, I wrote a blog post, or I wrote a post that said the title was something like, I'm a Christian and I support gay marriage. And I knew, well, I didn't really know, because my church was one of those churches that never made it clear, right? They were absolutely not affirming, but they didn't make that clear. They said, oh, we love everyone, you can come. But then if they found out you were gay, forget it. You couldn't get married, you couldn't get baptized, you couldn't take communion, you couldn't have a leadership role. You definitely couldn't teach children. It was ridiculous, like the hatefulness that they embodied in that. But I didn't really know all of that in the beginning where I was. I just wasn't sure where exactly they felt, because they didn't make it clear and they didn't talk about it until, and I promise you that my pastor was not reading parenting blogs on NJ.com. Somebody turned my article into him, basically tattled on me. And I got called into the office, and the pastor's office, and I was told that staff do not write about divisive issues. Now, for a lot of reasons, I was horrified. I was really frustrated. But for a lot of reasons, including my own lack of emotional maturity and my bank account and a lot of other reasons, I did not leave staff right away, and I silenced myself, and I stayed very safe in my writing, and my writing went nowhere. And after after about a few years, I couldn't do it anymore. The call to write and the call to write authentically was too strong. And I just really, I felt like I had to follow my voice. So I quit. I quit that job and I walked away. And I began to write more authentically. And I had a very small audience. Mostly it was people from my church, family and friends, a few work colleagues. And once again, I was shocked by I noticed the raised eyebrows of a few. I noticed the distancing from a few people that had called me friend before. But what I was more surprised by and shocked by were the number of people who came to me and said, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Like, thank you so much for what you've been writing, because I'm pretty sure my daughter is gay and I don't know how to talk to her about this. And oh my gosh, my life group basically told me that, something horrible about my kid, and I can't be part of that life group anymore. And you gave me a space where I could go and learn that I can commune with God, right? So I started realizing that my writing was really having that impact, and I was really surprised by that. Shortly after that, my blog got picked up by Patheos. So I started writing the blog named Jersey Girl Jesus. And because of getting on that platform, my platform grew exponentially. That was in 2016. And within, days, I went from having maybe a few hundred hits on my posts to 10, 20, 30,000 hits in a day, on my posts. And it was really, I was like, whoa, like, and then the comments started coming, and I would get very vitriolic, mostly by straight white men comments, hateful, horrible comments by these men who knew scripture, and they basically tried very hard to put me in my place. And I also was continuing to get more of those messages from people who had felt so othered and ostracized, and were finding a safe place in the work that I was writing about. So I was writing about LGBTQ rights. I was writing about the Take a Knee movement. I was writing about police brutality and women's rights, and how all of that fit in with Jesus, right, and with God and with church. And within just a few weeks after I started writing on that platform, I got invited to go on an all-expense-paid trip to Jordan. Yes, the country in the Middle East, to Jordan, with a bunch of other amazing writers. I didn't even have a passport at this point in time. I had to go and rush my passport. Went on this amazing trip with a bunch of other writers that are very well known in the progressive Christian world. Had such an amazing time. I now call them my friends. They have it's been so wonderful to have them comment on my books and draw upon their wisdom. And so that was an amazing thing. But then I also, because of the two sides of the coin that I was capturing in my comments on my blog posts, these straight white men who were hammering home this very conservative Christianity that was very abusive and hate-filled, and then this other place where I was finding myself actually doing ministry, I was like, I think I need to know what I'm talking about. So I decided to go to seminary. And I found the most amazing seminary experience where I came here to Indianapolis, where I am currently just here for the week, and to Christian Theological Seminary. But I was part of a very particular cohort that doesn't exist anymore called the Open Cohort, where we spent half the time at CTS and then the other half we traveled around, and I got to learn from people like Jackie Lewis and Nadia Boltz-Weber and also Amy Butler, all sorts of amazing, Ruby Sales, like, and that was actually really transformative. Got to seminary, heard an episode of On Being in which Ruby Sales said, I know that we have a Black liberating theology, but where is the white liberating theology that liberates white people from this illness of dominance that we have? And then that was life-changing for me. It started me thinking about what is whiteness actually. I need to start to understand this. A year later, I got to actually sit at the feet of Ruby Sales. And if you don't know who Ruby Sales is, she is a Black activist, a womanist theologian, public theologian. And when she was 17, she was standing on the porch of a general store during a civil rights rally. A white man walked up to her with a rifle, pulled the trigger, and a white seminarian leaped in front of her and took the bullet and died instantly in that moment, which of course changed the trajectory of her life. And I literally got to sit at her feet, and she held my hand in her lap, and she stared me in the eyeballs, and she said, whiteness is flattening and homogenizing white people. It is murdering the souls of white people. It is flattening and homogenizing you, and it is separating you from your lineages. And I was so drawn in by her generosity of spirit and her compassion for this identity that has done so much harm. And that made me start to really wonder, what is whiteness? And that's what led to me starting to write more about whiteness as opposed to what whiteness does to black people or Black and brown people, but what is whiteness in itself? And it was while I was writing about that kind of stuff that an editor actually reached out to me and said, hey, Carrie, I am an editor with WJK Books, and I've been following your blog for a while now. And the last two blog posts I really loved, and I'm wondering if you would like to submit a book proposal. Like, that's every writer's dream. You know, so many writers cannot even get their book proposal in front of a publisher. And here I had a publisher inviting me to submit a book proposal. That led to writing Good White Racist, which came out. I wrote the proposal on breaks in class for finishing up my Master of Divinity. That book came out in 2020, in March of 2020, about 3 months before the murder of George Floyd. Between what happened that summer and with COVID, it offered the opportunity for me to speak to churches all over the country via Zoom, just like things like this, about the issues, and churches were starting to wake up and start to say, like, hey, how do we actually address this issue as the church? And that led to the second book, Wait, Is This Racist? A Guide for Churches to Become Anti-Racist. And so none of that would have happened if I had stayed safe in my writing. None of that would have happened if I had decided to write only about, nice little ditties about Jesus, and scripture and the Bible. All of that happened because I chose to be confronted with the Jesus that I saw on the pages, who was calling me to do something and to say something and to have an opinion about certain things and to write about that opinion. And my life has changed exponentially. And as Kate alluded to, I am here in Indianapolis, back at CTS. I just finished my second day of my first class of my doctorate work. And so I have another whole long journey ahead of me. Thank you. And I'm hoping to continue doing this work and hopefully live up to Ruby Sales' challenge to me. So that's essentially my conversation, or what I have to offer right now, but I cannot wait to hear your questions and your comments and wonderings and what you're writing and all of that stuff.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Carrie. What an amazing, I love listening to you. We could go another 20 minutes just hearing your story. Sounds incredible. And also just really, it sounds like the way the Holy Spirit has worked in your life in terms of timing and,
Mhm.
influential relationships and contacts. So I'm grateful for that, really grateful. I would love to invite everyone again, for those of you who have joined, I'm Kate Rademacher. I work with Brian Lane and I'm facilitating the discussion tonight. So I'll start us off maybe with a question, but if others, there's the raise your hand emoji, emoticon. You can also put your question in the chat. Or just come off of mute if you're having issues with the raise hand function. So Carrie, just really want to again thank you for your words, for your bravery, for your story, really, and your conviction, and just for I think inspiring all of us and inspiring me. And I'll just share. I was telling Carrie before she joined that I've worked in reproductive health for 20 years, and so I think I'm at a place where I'm discerning right now about sort of how to take a more bold voice on issues like reproductive justice and in a post-Dobbs era, and the issues that in that case, I think I'm really. You mentioned uh, maybe a mutual friend of ours, or I think maybe Amy Julia Becker. We were talking about this in another event Brian Elaine had, which is sort of the balance of prophetic and pastoral. So, I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about that. As like, how do you balance in your writing and your speaking, being prophetic and being bold and being strong, and also being pastoral in terms of sort of supporting people, meeting people where they're at, and maybe in your, I don't mean to be throwing you a curveball, but just as maybe you could say a little bit about what you mean by paradox, or sort of what's an
Mm.
paradox, and maybe for you it means a different thing, but I just want to talk about that sort of conversation we're having as well. So
Yeah. I love that you bring up the difference between being pastoral and being a prophet, because my favorite my favorite professor, who is the one who convinced me to come back. He offered me a lot of healing, because in seminary, when you're getting an MDiv, everybody assumes that you want to be a pastor. I had no desire to be a pastor. I never had a desire to be a pastor. I just found myself in roles where I was ministering to people. When I was on staff at my church, I wasn't technically a pastor. I was the director of volunteers, right? So like in community involvement. Is it pastoral work? Absolutely. It's a different kind of pastoral work. It's not a life group. It's a different kind of pastoral work, but it is pastoral. I don't like to call myself a pastor. One of the things that he did, that he offered me, that was so beautiful, was he said, Carrie, you're not a pastor, you're a prophet. And that gave me, first of all, it gave me healing because I felt seen. And secondly, it gave my work a value, because I would do harm as a pastor. I really would. Like, I've come to that conclusion. I would do harm because of my personality style. Like, I just would do harm. But being a prophet is something that feels right, right? And the other thing that I think is really important is, one of the things that I say to churches all the time when I'm consulting with them, is that I consider the work of deconstructing whiteness, and of in predominantly white churches, and addressing the inherently racist culture that we live and breathe in, is a matter of urgent pastoral care. Urgent pastoral care. And it should be a deep concern for every lead pastor. They should be making it a priority in their churches. And I say that one of the things that I really want white people to understand when I say that, is that I am talking about, it is a matter of deep and urgent pastoral care for white people, because we have a wound of dominance that needs healing. And it is born of trauma, and it needs healing, because we are out here, hurt people. Trauma, unhealed trauma just passes on more trauma, right? And so we are over here wounded and in our privilege, and we need to do something about that. And it's really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable work, but it's urgent pastoral work that needs to be done. So when I talk about paradox, one of the things that I've, especially as I've moved through this work more and more, and my work has expanded beyond race to be a little bit more inclusive of all identities of dominance and systems of dominance. I have come to understand that the more I understand dominance as a wound, the more annoyingly I have compassion for people I love to hate, right? Because, and it's really annoying. It's really annoying, but there are people that so I was working with a group, an organization a few days ago, and there was a white man who basically was trying to tell me that it's racist to say white people. Just to say white people is racist, right? And the temper tantrum that he had when I could remove myself from the emotion of it, and the way he was responding and behaving in that moment, I was able to distance myself enough and be like, wow, that is unhealed trauma. What he is experiencing right now is a trauma response. And he needs healing, right? And as much as I would love to hate on him, let's face it, I would love to just be mad at him. But he's got a wound that needs healing, right? And I am equipped in whatever way might be equipped to companion him through that journey if he's willing to take it, right? So that's what I mean when I say paradox, is that I can hold him accountable and responsible for his really bad behavior and his whiteness and his maleness, his toxic, not his maleness, but maleness is not inherently bad. Maleness is beautiful, but his toxic masculinity and the patriarchy that he is exhibiting, and the misogyny when he tried to put me in my place multiple times. All of those things, I can hold him accountable. I can say, hey, nope, not okay. And I can also see the wound of the human that is in him, that is wounded and hurting and having a trauma response. And I can see both. And that's what I mean when I say, when I invite people into paradox, that gets uncomfortable for people, because people love to hate people. We love to hate the other guy. So it's uncomfortable to move into a state where I'm going to hold, this is true, and so is this. He's a jerk and he's a human, right? Like, he's a human who deserves dignity and respect, and perhaps I'm being the one called in this moment to offer that to him while also holding him accountable. When you start to write about that and to question and interrogate that, you start to get to really good writing, I think, in my opinion.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was really helpful and interesting. Do others have questions or comments? Otherwise, I can ask another one. Please raise your hand or come off mute if you want to in.
I think Jerry has their hand raised.
Okay, I didn't see Jerry. Jerry?
I do.
Thank you.
So thank you. And I can't imagine going out on a limb that you've gone out on, and how difficult that is. It's difficult enough to talk about racism being an African-American. So, but one of the things I was wondering is if you would clarify more what you mean by wound of dominance. I think there's so many pieces to racism. And then when I think about a wound, I think about a person who is in the dominant culture. I think more in terms of not so much a wound because of dominance, but a wound because of, well, anger and fear and being held responsible for things that they feel that they weren't responsible for, that were in the past, those kinds of things. And again, getting to know someone as a person makes a big difference, I think, on either side. So, I mean, I've been around a long time and have been in a lot of different settings. I'm a psychologist by trade and was in the public school system for most of the time. And then I'm also been assistant and associate pastor in my church. And so see from several different angles. So I can honestly say that in many cases, in all the different schools and positions that I had in the school system, people didn't bring racism to me in that sense. And maybe there was something about them or something about me. So I didn't see that as much unless I went outside, and in different kinds of settings. So say a little bit more about that wound of dominance.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I want to be honest that this wound of dominance is actually hopefully my next book or something that I will be working on. So it is a work in progress. So it's something that I've just become, as I've gone through the work and the research that I've done thus far for the first two books on this topic, this is something that's revealing itself to me. And what I mean by the wound of dominance is that there is, okay, so I want to talk about it in two ways. So first, let's talk about the reality, the historical realities of the fact that in the time, let's just go through from the time of Christ, although we could go way back, right? People have been doing horrible things to each other for a very long time, right? And there is trauma involved in that. And if you look at the European, those of us who have European lineage, people who lived in Europe on the daily would walk down the street and see a beheading or two, right? Like that was a normal part of everyday life, of seeing the things. And this was predominantly white against white, violence, right? Plague, the trauma of the plagues, the trauma of the war and all of that, right? Then we brought all of that trauma over here and said, hey, let's create something new, right? But we brought all of that trauma with us. But if you understand, if you've read Resmaa Menakem's work, My Grandmother's Hands, like he talks about how generational trauma starts to look like personality, right? And it's not necessarily personality, but it starts to look like that, right? So now you have a whole society, a whole culture that has generational trauma that looks like it's just part of who we are, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that aspect of it, that generational trauma that we then come and then we have done horrific things to other people as we became human traffickers who enslaved and tortured and kidnapped generations of people and then came over here and slaughtered whole other generations of people, right? So there's that aspect, right? And then we can talk about perpetrator trauma, which is this idea, a fascinating idea that says that we have given trauma a moral value, that if you are traumatized, then you've been hurt, and so therefore you are inherently good, and the person who hurt you is inherently bad. Obviously, we need to be able to hold the paradox that that's not entirely true, and that trauma in and of itself is not a moral value, and that there's a fascinating study about a man who was responsible for killing thousands of people during a genocide, and he demonstrated trauma, like he was having trauma responses even as he was proud of his quote accomplishments, right, during that genocide. So understanding how we understand trauma. So taking all of that and then understanding that when it comes to a traumatized person who finally feels as though they have power, and you cannot deny the fact, and there's a whole class, and you can go read anything by Mark Charles about this, that our country was founded to favor white landowning men and nobody else. They were the only people who are seen as human. So those people, these Europeans who came over traumatized, now they have all of this power, and it's all a construct. It's all a construct. It's not real. It is real in that it has teeth. It can do real damage, but they're not innately more worthy of power than any of the rest of us, right? But they have power, and they know that deep down, they know that their power is, or their quote, right to power is, I want to say a curse word, make it up in your head, right? That it's all that, right? It's nothing, it's meaningless. And so the wound, that frailty, that fear of loss of power is the wound. The dominance is what they build around it to defend and protect the wound. So they develop systems of dominance and power and frail, ridiculous, exhausting emotional machinations to keep us from actually touching that wound. All of the ways that they deny and defend and deflect. Let's talk about police brutality, but the flag's feelings got hurt when Colin kneeled, right? Like ridiculous, stupid things that make absolutely no sense when you look at them logically, but they will use those arguments as a wound to defend that wound. Does that help answer the question? And hopefully when I get it more fleshed out, we can have another conversation because it's still a big question in my mind. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for that question, and Carrie for your response. Sarah, did you want to ask? Is that your hand?
Yeah, I have a question, but I was going to tell you, Carrie, there's a story in Chronicles with David where he did something bad. He numbered all his people and he wasn't supposed to because of Satan. It might be a good story for your book.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. It has to do with commodification of people or something. But anyway, my question is about making mistakes. Like, I feel like people can't make mistakes, and it's like, but you feel like you can make mistakes? Like,
so I want to make sure I understand your question. When you say that you feel like people can't make mistakes, are you saying that they think they themselves think they can't make mistakes, or do you think it's not safe in the public sphere for them to make mistakes?
The feeling that it's not safe in the public sphere.
It's not safe in the public sphere to make mistakes. It's not. And so that's why there needs to be a certain grit and a willingness to stand in that space, because there will be people who are absolutely cruel, 100%. And let me tell you something. I would love to tell you the story about George. So one day I woke up and I went to go get a cup of coffee, and I opened up Facebook and I saw what looked like, I was on my author page, and it was this guy named George, and he posted something. He said, my daughter told me I'm a racist, and I don't think I am. So I wanted to find out if I am a racist. So I went out and I got a book, and I got this book. And then it just kind of devolves from there into this horrible diatribe about how I must be an awful person, and the book was horrible, and he wasted his $11.99 or whatever he paid for it, and it was a waste of his time and all this stuff, And so obviously he didn't like the book, and I was like, oh, whatever. Okay, so I didn't have my coffee yet, so I just wrote something along the lines of, "What a lovely and charming good morning message to wake up to." I said, "I hope you have a lovely day, George." And then I put my phone down and I was going to walk away. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, I don't know, like, as much as he's kind of being a jerk to me, there's got to be some kind of good guy in him, because he cared what his daughter thought enough to go out and get a book to find out if he was racist, right? There's something there. There's something there that we can work with, right? So I wrote back again. I picked up my phone and I went back and I said, "Hey, George, you know what? I'm sorry you didn't like the book. Perhaps, if you're willing, please DM me your mailing address, and I will be happy to send you a personal check refunding you the cost of my book. And I can make some suggestions, perhaps some James Cone or James Baldwin." And that was a little bit me being snarky, because if he didn't like my book, he certainly isn't going to like James Cone or James Baldwin. But I was like, maybe you could find another author that you would like better, that could help you on your journey, right? And he responded to that. And he's like, "Oh, well, I didn't mean to say that you were an awful person." And we ended up having a dialogue. And then some of my friends started coming into the dialogue. And my one friend, really good friend, Evelyn, like, George and I were talking, and Evelyn's like, "Sounds like you guys should have a beer together." And he goes, "I do like beer." And I said, "Well, I prefer Merlot." And he goes, "Well, I just poured myself a good cap." And I was like, "Oh, this is awesome." And we were starting to relate to each other. And unfortunately, some of my more progressive friends kind of came in, didn't pay attention to where it was going, and they started being really mean and nasty to George. And he suddenly left the building, and I never heard from him again. So it's not a safe place to be in the public sphere. And it wasn't a safe place for George either. And I think that's a shame, because George could have been on the journey to something new, a new discovery about himself and about the world. And hopefully he'll still be there. Maybe he went back and reread the book with a different viewpoint. I don't know. So thank you for that question, Sarah.
Wow. It also really shows I think that the complexity of social media, and, we're really in such a challenging era, I think, as
Yes.
we engage in these discussions.
Yes.
Is it Danielle? Has her hand raised? Yes. Hi, Danielle.
Hey, good evening. Thank you so much for this. This has been great. I wanted to just kind of piggyback on this piece about making mistakes and it being a safe place. I've been in an ongoing dialogue for the past week now on Twitter where someone in the media got something wrong. I mean, just really got something wrong a few years ago and it impacted the person's life like tremendously, domino effect. And she recently came out and said, hey, listen, I was wrong. I never should have called for his resignation. I'm a woman of faith. I messed up. I messed up. I messed up. Y'all help me make this right. Like I've apologized to him publicly. And everyone else that was on the same train as me calling for his resignation, we gotta step up and say that we messed up. And now suddenly everything is silent. And she's like, I don't understand. Like everybody was crying with me, right? We were all in an outrage together. And so we've been having an ongoing dialogue about, you know, the responsibility of our words, but then also like having the grit on that front side, like you said, Carrie, like the grit, but then also the grace on the back side. Like where's the grace? If I make a mistake, is there grace? When I apologize for said mistake, what does that grace look like as well? And we've been talking about how do we bring people back into the fold once we've canceled them, right? Is there an opportunity for redemption in that, especially from those of us that say, oh, we're believers, right? We believe in the redeeming power of Christ, but then we don't believe in redeeming you for the mistake that you made on Twitter publicly. And then Constance Wu, the actress, actually went on Red Table Talk this week and talked about being canceled and what that was like, what that has been like for her. And so when I think about that question about being a writer, you know, and it being a safe space to make a mistake, I know that I've had that question, like, am I going to get out here and say something that is very truly my opinion? Like it is very much how I feel in this moment, but also that could change later. I put out something a couple of months ago and the post was about learning to hate at church. Like I learned hate in church. And so there were some people there like, oh my God, me too. I've been wanting to say that out loud for so long. And then there were people that are like, how dare you like say this?
Sounds like you struck a nerve.
Right. How dare you have the nerve to admit that you learned how to hate at church, you know? So I wanted to just say thank you for breaching this part of the conversation. Sarah, thank you for bringing that up as well, because I think it's important that we do have both grit and grace for ourselves and for others, knowing that it's possible that we could get it wrong. Like what we learned today could be different next year, right? Like who I am and who I evolve into may be very different. My theology may change based on an experience.
Oh my God, I looked at some of the things that I wrote a long time ago and I'm like, oh my gosh, So I love that. Thank you. And I love that idea of grit and grace. I think that could be a blog post or something.
Let's do it.
I think that's beautiful. I really do love that. And you know, when I said earlier, I think I said earlier about when you own your mistakes and you've made them public, that is something that shows that you have skin in the game, right? That this is something that, and it gives you street cred. And I learned that from a friend of mine who is a Black biracial man. And, you know, we were talking a lot about how a lot of what the phenomenon of a lot of white influencers, especially on social media, who have these very glossy social media, Instagram feeds and stuff. And they would do things like appropriate a very famous saying by a Black author. And then when they were called out for that or called in, they took the post down and then posted a picture, a pretty picture that didn't say anything, but the caption was an apology. So basically it erased the whole thing, right? And not only did it silence all of the women primarily women of color who were expressing the pain of what she did and why it was so important, right, by taking that post down. But she could have just corrected the post by giving it appropriation and then issuing an apology. Her actual apology post just looks like a pretty picture. And unless you actually go in and read the caption, you wouldn't know that she had done anything wrong. And so, you know, now I have learned, I didn't always do this, but it's a journey, right? So I have learned that when I make a mistake, and I have made plenty of public mistakes, when I make that mistake, I leave the original post up. Sometimes I will edit it with a clear thing that says, this is edited. I have since learned, here is, what I'm going to do differently. I apologize, and this is what I'm going to do differently. Or I will write a new post that says, hey, you can see this post below. I was a jerk. Here's why. I'm not going to do it anymore. I've learned from this. Thank you to whoever called me out for that, right? So, and I will leave it on my post for all the world to learn from, because otherwise I'm silencing people. I'm not offering other people an opportunity to learn from my mistake. And so I think, my friend told me, he's like, that's how I know somebody has skin in the game, when they can own that mistake publicly, but that doesn't mean that there will be some people who will still roll their eyes about me, continue to think what they're going to think. And that's okay. So.
Thank you. I love that example, Carrie, of like you really giving us the practical, like how to own a mistake online. Cause I think that's I think that's really powerful. And I think, you talk about bravery in your writing. And I think, listening to it makes me realize I can be more brave also in my social media engagement and take risks, even though they're, again, also being careful, but also then being able to see how you can engage in the process if there are, if you do feel you make a mistake. So I think that's great. Are there any other comments or questions? Jerry, do you want to jump back in? I see your hand raised. Yeah.
Yes, I'm just doing this because nobody else is asking, because I can, or very few people. Are you writing as a prophet? And let me tell you why I asked that question, because we talk about controversy and the reactions of people and what you do in that forum and safety and all those kinds of things. And as you described, the people who are, responding, death threats and those kinds of things. What gives you the courage? I'm writing a book because God told me to write the book, and I'm very, very clear on that. First of all, because I know I would not have chosen this particular book at this time to write. So the only way that I can continue writing the book is that I know that he told me to do it. And as for all kinds of strength in between, and that's even before, it's out there, everybody's commenting on it. So if you're not writing as a prophet, and I do mean that in terms of him giving you what to write and when to write and those kinds of things, how do you make it through that difficult period of the backlash and the things that come against you and the people that aren't going to agree with you no matter what you say, right or wrong?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know if I personally call myself a prophet, but as I mentioned earlier, my professor called me a prophet, and that was a powerful moment for me. And I receive it. I receive that. When you say specifically like that for you, that means that the words are coming, that this is a call of God. Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't do this if it wasn't because of Jesus. I'm doing this because of what I witnessed, my experience of Jesus. And I say that both the Jesus that I see in Scripture, which, and I'm highly skeptical of Scripture in a lot of ways, like, I interrogate it, I question it, but also the Jesus that I have encountered as a mystic, and the Holy Spirit. So I definitely feel a call in that sense. And I have had the experience oftentimes of writing and being so engrossed in the writing process and coming out of it and going, how did that happen? Where did those words come from? Like, those don't feel like mine, thinking that it was in the process, it wasn't making any sense. And then also going back and going, wow, I couldn't have made that kind of sense if I tried, so like that kind of experience has happened to me very, very often. And also, Jesus, unfortunately, is not standing, well, maybe sometimes he is, but not in a way I can touch, right? I can't touch him, but I can touch Anne, who's sitting in the next room listening to me, and she's my buddy in my cohort who I met in seminary, and I can touch Cassidy, who's coming over tomorrow, and these are the people who do this work as well in various contexts, and there are many other people that I know who in various contexts who get it. Some of them are white people who understand that weird intersection, like it's something called, I call intersectional dominance. That's part of what I'm going to also be talking about, I want to use Kimberly Crenshaw's idea of intersectionality and start to use that to examine what it means to be partially embodied as a dominant identity and partially embodied as an oppressed identity, and the complexity of that, right? And how we deal with that. But I am drawn to the communal, right? When I am having those moments, and they are often, right? And I get it from a lot of different places. There are lots of Black people who don't think a white person should be writing about this stuff, right? And that's valid. And it's totally valid, right? So it's something I wrestle with all the time, and I'm constantly struggling with it. And so I have friends who are also deeply concerned with this work. And I think that was the fact that I found them and can call them my beloveds is also an act of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you for that question, Jerry, and also thank you for that response. You know, Carrie, before we started the event, we were talking about loneliness and the loneliness people can feel as a writer. Sounds like, I mean, I think once your work is out there, there can be more opportunities for engagement like this, but maybe, you know, we just have a couple minutes left. Maybe can you just say a little bit more about the concept of loneliness and connection, and how you as a writer writing about controversial topics and difficult topics, you know, navigate that sense of loneliness?
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody who's ever written anything knows that moment where you go, what the heck am I doing this for? This sucks. Nobody's going to want to read this. Why am I wasting my time? Like, I think we've all had that moment, you know, and that is usually the moment when maybe you do need to step away from the work and come back to it with a fresh eye and be reinvigorated. And I think that's totally okay. And I have found the loneliness of writing, the reward is in this kind of dialogue, right? I've had, like I said earlier, I've had the opportunity to do this with hundreds of churches who have read through the books, and I got to do some amazing webinars, and sometimes I'm even granted the opportunity and the great privilege to go in and companion people on this journey in person when I consult, right? And so there is a reward on that other end, but I've often had this image of a desert walker, I've had this image in my head of a lone person walking in the desert, you know, sandy feet and tattered robes, alone. And that image has called to me for a long time, and I don't fully understand it. And quite frankly, she makes me a little uncomfortable. But I'm following that voice because she's calling me to places where I think I need to go, and I think I need to go there alone, right? And then I get to reemerge and come out and commune with my beloveds again, and then with the greater public, right? But I think there is a reason that writing is a solitary, lonely practice, because we're being invited to meet ourselves, you know.
Amen. Yes. Well, thank you. Are there any other final comments or questions before we wrap up? All right. Well, this has been a really rich conversation. I want to thank everyone who participated. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much, Carrie, for joining us. Please check out Carrie's work. Her new book has just come out, and about how churches can do more in this. And the title is Wait, Is This a Racist? A Guide to Becoming an Anti-Racist Church. So thank you so much for your work and your writing, Carrie. We're really blessed by your presence and blessed by your prophetic voice. Everyone who's here, just a reminder, we'll be back again next month, the second Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. So we're going to have a great speaker. Check out Writing for Life for more information. And thank you all again for being here. I look forward to continued engagement with you, Carrie. I'm going to follow you. So I guess we're already on social media, and look forward to reading more.
Thank you. I just tell, please everybody connect with me on Facebook. And if you do, just DM me so that I know that you were on here, because I get some weird people who want to friend me. But if you friend me and DM me and say you were on here, I will accept the friendship. So appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Have a great, safe night, and look forward to connecting again soon. Take care.
Thank you. Good night.